Thank you. Thanks. We're being recorded now. Thank you, Martijn. It's good to see everybody here virtually today. My name is Judith from the Bovenkamp. I work for OostNL. OostNL, I hope you all know, is the regional development agency of the provinces Gelderland and Overijssel. And we are here to help companies in a very broad way. But what we do under the name of Go for Export is to assist companies from Gelderland and Overijssel by expanding their markets abroad. Go for Export is Gelderland and Overijssel for export. I will briefly introduce what we do here today. After that, I will give the word to Nico and Reinout from China to delve into that a bit deeper. Firstly, what we do in trade development, handelsbevordering in Dutch, is just a very small part of what a regional development agency does, but it's very important, I'd say. What we do is that we help companies to expand their markets in regions across the border. We do that at a local level, so our two provinces, but we closely cooperate with the Dutch national government, the Rijksdienst van Ondernemend Nederland, Netherlands Enterprise Agency in The Hague, and also cross-border. Important there is that we always work bottom up. So we see what is happening in the region, what kind of companies have the capacity and the potential to grow abroad, and we help them very targetedly with that. So we feed into existing activities organized by the national government, Chamber of Commerce, that sort of thing, and help at a local level. We work cross public and private partnerships, and we have a very small team, so it's very easy to reach us. Our approach is we have a very extensive website, goforexport.nl, where you can find all our activities, incentives that we have, subsidies, activities, blogs, everything. We organize many events through a very extensive network within and outside the Netherlands. We used to organize very frequent economic trade missions and participation in trade fairs abroad. Of course, well, you all understand that's been on hold a bit for the past year or so. So we offer a lot of our activities online now, and this webinar is an example, but we also organize more extensive networking, for example, where you are targetedly introduced as a Dutch company with a certain need to potential partners across the border in more extensive online events. Our focus lies on Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, China, Canada, and the United States, because the world is very, very big, and we decided that focusing on these countries meets the demand of companies in East Netherlands and offers a large potential. China is a very important one there, because both Gelderland and Overijssel have a sister province in China. They're the provinces of Liaoning in the northeast of China and Hubei in central China. And if travel will allow again, we organize one trade mission at least a year to both provinces, where we can use these existing ties of the two governments to introduce companies to the right partner there. We work very closely there with the Dutch government network, which I'm sure Nico will delve into a bit deeper during his presentation. What's important to note here that the Overijssel province has its own office in its sister province Liaoning, and I have a colleague there who can help also with market research on the ground and introducing to potential partners there. As a Dutch company from Overijssel or Gelderland, you can make use of what we have to offer. If you're from another province, if you happen to be from another province but listening anyway, you can reach out to your own regional development agency because they offer similar services. For companies based in Gelderland, which I think is the majority of companies joining today's meeting, we have something called an export voucher, which is very good to make use of if you have decided that, for example, the Chinese market is of interest to you and you would like to conduct a bit more elaborate market scan, or you want to be introduced to specific partners there, want to join a trade mission or a delegation, you can apply for subsidy there. I'm happy to go into that a bit deeper if you have specific questions about your company during a one-on-one after this presentation. As said, if time allows, again, we frequently organize trade missions and participation in trade fairs, sometimes also with representatives from the local government. Because if you join a trade delegation led by the governor or the vice governor of your own province, it's easier to make contact with that same government level in either Hubei or Liaoning. And we work together with the local Dutch representation there as well. So it's very easy as a Dutch company to join a group and then present yourself in China. It's easier than just going there on your own and knocking at the door by yourself. It's very important in Go for Export also to share experiences, learn from other, probably already more experienced international companies. We have a very extensive network, public-private, also abroad. So I just would like to stress, if you are interested in joining a trade delegation, if you're interested in entering the Chinese market, you can reach out to us. We're located close by. Our office is in Apeldoorn. Just found an example of a company that did join a trade mission to Liaoning a few years ago, and really found a partner there. So this is just a quote they gave. It's very easy, low way to see if the Chinese market or one of the other countries that we work with is the right one for you. Go for Export, Gelderland Overijssel for Export, is a consortium of local regional organizations in Gelderland and Overijssel. These ones listed here are the consortium partners, but we frequently work with other regional partners, today Briskr. So it's not limited to this, but this is just to give you an overview that we work cross-branch, both national offices of also, regional offices of national organizations based in the Netherlands, for example, Metalimi, Chamber of Commerce. We work very broad. China is very important, and I'm very happy that we can work together with Briskr here to tell you a bit more about the very interesting market that China is. I would like to give the floor first now to Nico, who will tell you a bit more about opportunities there for companies in the health sector specifically. But again, if you have any questions, we're here in the region, so please contact me if you have any questions. For now, I think Marion will share Nico's slides, and he will tell you a bit more about what he does in Beijing. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. If everybody can hear me, then I'll be glad to start my presentation. Good afternoon or good evening for those who are in China. It's a great pleasure to give this presentation, to give share some trends and developments in the Chinese life science and health sector and business opportunities that this provides for the Netherlands. Many thanks to the organization. I've been talking to Judith a couple of weeks ago when this idea came up, me giving a presentation. I'm very happy that we're here together, although indeed digitally at this stage. When looking at the profiles of you as participants, I adapted a little bit the presentation in order to give a little bit more of a broader image, which could generate questions, but also further interests in information, or if you're looking for partners, etc. I'll say more about that in a minute. The focus will be especially looking at the profiles on developments in the pharmaceutical sector and in the medical technology and the medical devices sector, but obviously there are other opportunities as well. Now, if we go on to the next slide, first to give a little bit of an idea, if I can have the next slide. The outline for this presentation is first introducing a little bit what Judith just mentioned, what we do, then going through some key figures, sharing with you how The life science and health structure is governed here, the medical services sector, and then some other sectors. The policy trends that I would like to share with you, and then really getting very concretely, if you're interested in doing business in and with China, what you could do, and then I will end up in sharing some practical tips with you. Now, let us first, on the next slide, introduce ourselves a little bit as a counselor for health, welfare, and sport. So what do I focus on together with my team? Very much, of course, first of all, in everything that relates to health and care policy, including ICT and digitalization, public health, curative care, medicines and medical technology. The focus will be very much on medicines and medical technology today, long-term care, including elderly care and sport. Now, how do we do that? We provide you with information, we can search partners for you, and we can co-organize or organize ourselves events in various fields that are mentioned here on the sheet. In very short, you could say that we can accompany you from contact to contract. It's only one letter difference, but you know better than I do that there's a whole world in between, and I'm sure that Reinout will talk about that as well. As Judith mentioned, we are not alone in Beijing as a network here in China. The embassy obviously is in Beijing, but there are also various consulates general that you see in blue and in light green, also various Netherlands business support offices. Those are support offices, especially for Dutch SMEs who want to do business in specific regions and that are a little bit further away from Beijing in order to provide you with generic or with tailor-made services. Just to give you a very quick idea. Now let us get on with some key figures and indicators on the life sciences and health sector in China. Probably you all know that the Chinese population is aging and is aging very fast. There was just the 7th national population census that was carried out, and it showed that the population aged 65 and above is 13.5% compared with that of 20 years ago. Today we issued a news item where we even mentioned that the 60 plus amounts to 250 million elderly already in China. The overall average life expectancy is currently 77.3 years. But in some cities, the life expectancy can be longer. For instance, Beijing, where I am now, the life expectancy is 83 years. In Shanghai, 84. In Guangzhou in the south, 81, almost 82. So there is still an imbalance in the development, not only in socio-economic terms, but also very much in the health status of the population, which holds also very much for the Netherlands, as we know. At the end of 2019, the Chinese government made a Health for All blueprint, which is called Health China 2030, and laid out a series of ambitious health indicators and strategies for the coming 10 years, so up to 2030. Here I only list some of the indicators, and you can see from this list that the out-of-pocket costs amount to 28%, which is still relatively high, but it is decreasing up to 25%, as you can see, in 2030. Now, if we continue on the key figures and indicators on the next slides, you can see that, like in many other countries, the non-communicable diseases are very much now representing the main cause of disease and disease burden. I don't know whether you can see it very clearly on this sheet, but if you look, for instance, at number 14, Alzheimer's disease, that was still very low, relatively low in 1990, on the 29th position, and on the 14th position in 2017. And others, for instance, if you look at diarrheal diseases, has decreased enormously compared to 1990. Now, according to this Lancet paper that I used here as a source, you can see that the leading causes of death and disability-adjusted life years at the national level in China in 2017 were stroke, heart disease, COPD, lung cancer, and road injuries. This explains also why today I will focus very much on the pharma and the medical technology and medical devices. When looking then at the governance of the life sciences and health sector on the next sheets, we get a global picture of the overall governance structure. This is only some highlights of the governance structure because, as a matter of fact, there are more organizations that are involved in the life sciences and health sector and the medical sector in China. But this is a general picture which includes medical care, elderly care services, as well as the pharma and medical device industry. Important, which could be important for you as a Dutch company, is especially the NMPA, it's the National Medical Product Administration, which in the Netherlands would compare, let's say, to the College ter Beoordeling van Geneesmiddelen, CBG, or the Inspectorate, the Inspectie Gezondheidszorg en Jeugd. There's another organization which is relatively new, which was founded in 2018. It's the National Healthcare Security Administration, the SAMR, which shows on the sheet, which initiated the national level centralized drug procurement, which resulted in over 50% price cuts, and I will get back to that later on in this stage. You see the NDRC, National Development and Reform Commission, as a kind of a super ministry. That's one of the organizations. There are more, also the National Health Commission, with which the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport in the Netherlands has an MOU. Currently, we are implementing for a multi-annual program the MOU that we have with the NDRC on elderly care. But that's another topic, of course, and on the 3rd of June this week, we're organizing a webinar on this particular subject and the implementation of this MOU. Now, moving on to the medical service sector on the next sheet, you can see that although the number of private medical providers is almost double that of the public providers, the outpatient service provided by the private providers accounts for only less than 15% of the public of the total. And that ratio is about 17% for inpatient visits. And you can see that there are different levels of hospitals, level 1, level 2, level 3, the level 3 hospitals, and that's very much according to various indicators of staff, beds, and complexity, level 3 being the most complex. And there are some level 3 hospitals that are really super large hospitals with 10,000 beds, like this one that I show here in the Henan province, which is considered the largest hospital in Asia with 10,000 beds in 3 campuses with at least 12,500 employees. It is reported that the revenue of this hospital reached 1.3 billion revenue in 2019. Now, as there is no compulsory gatekeeper role of the lower level providers, people are free to, let's say, go shopping in different medical providers. You see that especially in big cities, those level 3 hospitals are quite busy and can sometimes get really crowded to overcrowded. This also explains why level 2 hospitals are transforming into more like rehabilitation specialized hospitals. Here you see a level 2 in Beijing that I visited last week. This is in the Haidian district of Beijing. And on your right-hand side below, you see a community medical center in Beijing that I visited last week as well, which organizes an early dementia intervention program for the community. Now let us move on to the pharma sector. First of all, providing you with a general picture. And here I would like to comment that the Chinese government has made really serious efforts in the last decade to modernize its pharma industry and promote the use of innovative drugs. The total trade value amounted to 84 billion US dollars, and almost half of it on exports and the other half on imports. Now I highlighted in green the comparison between the United States and between China. And what is I think interesting here to highlight is that the value share of the US has been decreasing, and you can see that the value share of China has been more than doubling from 2015 to 2020. When we look then at the ecosystem of the pharma sector on the next sheet, there are some elements that I would like to go through with you. The policy side, capital and capacity building. Now, first of all, on the policy side, as I just mentioned, we can see that the Chinese government has been having a very clear objective over the past, let's say, 5 years, which is to really foster an innovative pharma sector in China by improving the capacity and the efficiency of the regulatory system. Secondly, when mentioning capital, it is worthwhile mentioning that the size of the venture capital and private equity funds active in the pharma and healthcare sector grew 15 times from 12 billion RMB to 185 billion RMB over the past years, which is over 24 billion euros that has been reached right now. Thirdly, the capacity building in 2020, the pipeline of new drug R&D accounted for 14%, 14% of the pipeline globally. However, only very little of the still prescribed medicine is patent drug, especially when comparing to the EU and the United States, although it has been very much increasing. There are a lot of various interesting, and I just mentioned two here, industry associations, which could be interesting for some of you. One that is FERDA, that's the first one that I mentioned. It's a very influential industry association. It's called the China Pharmaceutical Innovation and Research Development Association. It has 153 Chinese pharma member companies. The second that I would like to mention is the R&D-based Pharmaceutical Association Committee, the RDPAC, that you see on the sheet, which is a non-profit organization made up of 44 member multinational pharma companies with pharmaceutical R&D capacity. Now, as of June last year, this organization has established 47 manufacturing facilities and 25 R&D centers in mainland China. Now, on the next sheet, I would like to zoom a little bit on the biopharma, because when you talk about development of the pharma sector, we have to mention, of course, the biopharma segment as well. Now, the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR of this segment was almost 20%, compared with that of the whole pharma sector, which amounted for 8.2%. Chinese biotech companies have been in-licensing as a shortcut, let's say, to establish their own portfolios and develop clinical development capabilities. Now, if you look into the top 15 licensing deals in 2020, 12 of them are in the field of oncology, so that's curative care. And for the 15 licensed out deals, also 12 of them are in the field of oncology, so that's quite a strong field, and increasingly so in China. Now I would like to take you through the medical device sector, where I would have 2 or 3 sheets to show with you. First of all, to be honest, that the China's medical devices field has so far not been considered as a high-end market, and maybe not even now. That being said, and I would like to stress that the climate and circumstances are changing very fast, like a lot of developments that are going very fast in China. The Chinese government has issued a series of measures in order to change the situation. For instance, a domestic substitution strategy, which has been a trend for public hospitals in the recent years. In 2020, due to COVID-19, there was a rapid surge in demand of medical devices, such as personal protective equipment, COVID-19 test kits, ventilators, etc. The Chinese medical device market revenue is estimated to have hit 104 billion euros in 2020, accounting for around 20% of the global medical device markets, more than doubling from the amount in 2015, just to mention how quick these developments can go. Now, the Netherlands is part of the top 10 exporting markets, as you can see from the sheet. The Netherlands is not part of the top 10 importing countries for China. The number one for China is Germany. And something that I would like to further dive into is to see to what extent Dutch companies, especially SMEs, are maybe suppliers to German companies who supply then directly to China. On the next sheet, maybe sharing some challenges and no, that goes too quickly. It should be, yeah. Thank you. Medical device sector, some key players, the National Association of the Medical Devices, CAMDI, has nearly 4,000 member companies. I just mentioned a few of them here. And maybe it's interesting to share with you that the medical devices companies, according to the chairman of CAMDI, Mr. Zhang Feng, whom we know very well, one of the challenges of the medical devices companies is that they handle the whole process from innovation to commercialization alone, which increases the risk to fail. The possibility of successful technology transfer from research institutes is still relatively low as well for medical device companies. And there is still a lack of intermediate players which can help to efficiently connect capital with the industry, and maybe some of you would be interested in taking such a role. Among the top Chinese MD companies, I will just mention one, which is at the top here. It's called Mindray. They have an establishment in the Netherlands as its regional headquarters in Europe. And now, indeed, going to the policy trends, there are a couple of which I would like to share with you. One of them being very much focusing on innovation, as the next sheet will show you. Now, again, a clear policy trend that we see in recent years is that the Chinese government is dedicated to foster an innovative life sciences and health industry. 3 points or 2 major points that I would like to share with you is, first of all, the Made in China 2025 and domestic substitution. Now, what does that mean? The Made in China 2025 is a strategic plan that was initiated in 2015 to reduce China's dependence on foreign technology and to promote China's and Chinese technological manufacturers. The goal is that by the year 2025, that the perception would be changed from a low-end manufacturer to a high-end producer. The Made in China 2025 initiative highlights 10 priority sectors, which includes the biopharmaceuticals and high-performance medical equipment. China has clearly identified various high-end medical devices, a segment in which the US is still a leader. These high-end medical devices have been identified as a priority industry among others, for reducing dependency on imports, as I highlighted a moment ago. The Made in China 2025 plan and the supporting policies identify certain high-end medical technologies for import substitution, as well as self-sufficiency goals. And since 2018, China has become the fourth largest medical device market worldwide, after the US, Western Europe, and Japan. A second element, as you can see from this sheet, is the regulatory development, which very much stimulates innovation. The government has organized an unprecedented number of new laws and regulations in the past 5 years in the regulatory field. First, it was decided that China would join the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. Also, building up the reviewing capacity of the NMPA, which I explained earlier in the governance structure. And the government also established a new center of pharma and medical devices review in Shanghai. The time needed for technical review has dropped with these initiatives dramatically in recent years, up to even 50%. Another initiative that you see, that's the last bullet on this sheet, that we organized a webinar at the end of 2020 to draw the attention of the Dutch life sciences and health sector about a new initiative of the free trade zone in Hainan. That's an island to the south. What does it mean? It implies that licensed innovative pharma or medical device products in the European Union or on the US markets could be used in the hospitals, in the pilots or the pilot hospitals, after a light procedure at the provincial branch of the NMPA, and could possibly, via the real-world study, get NMPA license for the whole country, so for China as a whole, the Chinese market as a whole. Now, if you would like to know more, get more information about this specific Hainan pathway, please contact us also after this webinar. Sunny, my colleague, is a real expert in this field. These moves are all for empowering the domestic innovation and attract more foreign innovative companies and products to the Chinese markets. So that's policy trend number one, stimulating innovation. Another policy trend is very much related to price pressure. As population ages, as I said earlier in this presentation, and the medical costs also surges, the government is taking various measures to curb the cost rise. One of the important moves is the centralized procurement. Now, as said earlier, the National Healthcare Security Administration was founded in 2018. And since 2019, so relatively quickly already, this administration has organized 4 rounds for centralized procurement for public hospitals in the field of drugs. It has reduced the prices of the list for an average of 54 to 59%. The same goes for the medical device centralized procurement, which was rolled out in late 2020. The first product was a coronary stent, and the intended quantity of the procurement was about 1 million. 2 foreign companies through an important license products were Boston Scientific and Medtronic. Now, taking a further step in getting it more concrete for you, now, if after all these previous slides and the comments that I made to these slides, if you want to enter the Chinese market, on the following slide, you can see different options or different roadmaps that you could follow to do so. There are 3 globally speaking. And this is just, of course, a broad overview of these 3 options. First of all, the first option is obviously purely exporting. You obtain an import license for your products via an agent or distributor, and your business is therefore also fully depending on your distributor. Secondly, you set up a legal entity in China, and you work with a Chinese contract manufacturing organization or contract development and manufacturing organization. You obtain thereby your own domestic license. By using a local CMO, CDMO partner, your company can meet local production mandates, thereby reducing regulatory barriers to market entry. And the third option is that you set up your own manufacturing entity in China. This requires obviously more capital investment from your side, and obviously also takes longer to enter the markets. But in the long run, manufacturers can lower production costs and develop localized after-service capabilities. Now, in closing this presentation, let me give you some practical tips. First of all, obviously, is do your homework. China is a very dynamic and has become and is becoming increasingly competitive markets. Important as well, which I don't mention here, but extremely important, is to get into contact with local authorities, get to know what their views are, what their priorities are, and get familiar not only with national, but also very much with local regulations, and seek expertise to assist you with the interpretation of these local regulations. Act quick, or with what some of the Dutch companies are already settled down in China told me recently, the China speed. I think it has become clear, at least I hope during this presentation, that developments are going very quickly here in China. And your clients will be expecting also that you will be able to provide a follow-up in a very quickly manner, especially if what you have to offer, a product or solution, is a high value in a specific technical niche. And therefore also think twice if a similar product or solution is already on the Chinese markets. Then really our advice would be think twice if you would like to enter the Chinese market, and the efforts that would take you, or the expectations that you would have. Another one is choosing from volume or margin. Still, we believe, and we see that overall profits can still be substantial if you go for volume-based instead of very much specific margin-based. Be present on the market. I mentioned already in the previous slides some specific elements through which you could do this. We can, of course, provide you with some advice as well, or to redirect you to other organizations that are more specialized in specific fields. Now, and really closing off with the final slides, I would like, of course, to thank you very much for being present in this webinar. I'm obviously open to all questions that you have, either now or after this webinar. I'm obviously also very much interested in hearing about what your main fields of interest are in China. And please do not hesitate to contact us. You see here the team that we have here in Beijing, fully dedicated to life sciences and health. And through us, we can also direct you to the colleagues at the Consulate General and the NBSOs that I mentioned in one of my first slides. Thank you very much. 谢谢.
Thank you, Nico, for that interesting and comprehensive overview. As you mentioned, and as I also just mentioned in the chat, if you have any questions to Nico, or in a minute to Reinout, who is up next, please ask them in the chat, and we will get back to you after the next presentation. which is Reinout from Malenstein, also talking to us from Beijing. Reinout, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Judith. Yes, normally I'm working from Shanghai, but I'm temporarily here in Beijing, which is always nice. This is the place where in 2007 I first moved to study Chinese and Chinese law. So it's always a great place to be. Let me see if I can share my screen so I can do my webinar share with you. There we go. And then I make it big screen. Can everyone see it like this? Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a topic that for most people in the world with regarding to China does not go together, which is intellectual property. The thing that people say cannot be done in China. What I'm going to tell you today is that intellectual property protection is possible in China, but you need to know the Chinese laws, you need to know the Chinese rules, and you need to be smart about it. So I'm senior counsel at HFG, which is a Chinese law firm and IP agency. And I particularly like working on the Chinese markets to do what the newspapers say is impossible, which is making intellectual property in China work. Now, what are the biggest mistakes basically that foreign companies make with Chinese intellectual property? And those are a few. Like one of them, for example, is not being aware of Chinese intellectual property laws. So this is a huge problem, actually. Basically means that companies think that if they use Dutch law or any other European law or American law, they're protected in China. It doesn't work like that. If you want to have protection in China, you need to first register your rights of trademark, patents, and preferably also copyright in China that can prove your rights. Also, there's some difference between trademarks. For example, in Europe, you have protection for the full trademark class, whereas in China, you need to pick which subclasses you want. Then there obviously is the need for a Chinese language trademark. There is a difference between design rights in the EU and in China, which I will address later. And then finally, there's a huge difference with regards to the power of evidence. In China, all evidence basically needs to be notarized, otherwise it will be considered as fake. So I will go through all these things, and I will also go through the main understanding of intellectual property to give you a very good first foundation of the Chinese IP law. So if we go to the basis of intellectual property, there's three basic IP rights. There's the rights of trademarks, patents, and copyrights. And in China, for the rights of trademarks and patents and design rights, so that's how the shape of a design, for example, you need to register that right in China. If you do not have that registered, you do not have any protection in China. The fact that you have a European registration or a Dutch registration does not matter. That will not protect you. In other words, register for China if you want to have these rights. Then a lot of companies often ask me, okay, I'm not on the Chinese market and I have no interest in going on the Chinese market for now. So therefore, I should not register any rights, correct? And the answer is actually, you should register your rights for China, because China is the country where most infringements come from and where most champions nowadays, as Nico said it already, are being made out of companies. If you have intellectual property protection, so you have rights of trademark, patent, rights of copyright, you can stop these infringers at the source, which is close down their Chinese factories. If you have rights abroad and not in China, you can try to get rid of the infringement there, but in the end, you can only take down the factory if you have these rights in China. If you try to do that with European rights, it will not work in China, because a Chinese judge will just tell you, you don't have any rights in China, you didn't take your protection serious, otherwise you would have applied for these rights. So better take down at the source and better make sure you have the right protections. Then if we talk about what can be a trademark, every company has a trademark because every company has their own name or a product name. And those are trademarks. Trademarks are words that can distinguish you from others. So people can actually recognize you. That's why we have the trademark law. Otherwise, if you would go to a supermarket and there's no trademark system and you want to buy a certain toothpaste, it would all have the same names because there's no protection for one name. And now with this horrible COVID situation, you see that like Pfizer and Moderna and Sinopharm, they all have the trademarks for these names protected. And that's how we can distinguish between these companies. So in China, what can be a trademark? It can be a word, it can be like a logo, for example, the Apple trademark with the bite out of it, can be a number combination, color combination, 3D symbol, which is also very interesting for products in a certain shape. And it can also be sounds. So for example, the Intel sound, tam, 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 tam. I'm not a great musician, as you can hear, but that can be protected also as a trademark. As long as it is not the same thing as the goods. So an apple, for example, for a fruit seller trying to sell apples, that would not be a good trademark because that is the source of the goods. So it needs to be different from that. So the big problem you're going to encounter is that there's a big chance that if you do not have your trademark yet registered, it probably already is registered by some opportunist Chinese person or company. Now, the good news is that since last year, since already beginning of last year, there is a new trademark law, and this trademark law is trying to go against these bad faith registrations. In Dutch, that would be kwade trouw registraties. So what can you do if you find out that your trademark is already registered? Well, you can get it back if you can prove that there's some kind of relationship between you and the company that registered it. For example, if it's your distributor in China or your business partner, then you can get it back. Also, if they have registered your logo and you have copyright protection on that logo, you can get it back. In certain cases, companies register way more trademarks than they need. And then you can also get it back by proving that this company registered way too much and also has registered trademarks of existing companies. You can get it back also if it's well known, but only few companies would be well known in China. So you'd be talking about the really huge companies like Coca-Cola, Apple, Adidas. Those companies are kind of well known in China. So this is the important thing. So for example, I put an iPhone back picture here because most iPhones have these protection bags around it, these hooshes, for the simple reason that they're quite expensive. So if you drop them, you want something to protect it. Now the problem is that someone had already registered for bags and protective cases the trademark iPhone. So Apple was actually not able in China to sell these cases with iPhone on it. And so this all goes back to the principle of Chinese trademark law, which is whoever registers first gets the trademark. Therefore, it's so important to register as fast as possible. And that's also the cheapest way to get your right registered and to use it later. So how to file a trademark? Two ways. There's the international way or the domestic way. Domestic registration is generally a lot faster. I put down here now 9 months. Now actually in practice, it's 5 months from the time to file a trademark. So from the moment you file a trademark, you often get it registered in 5 months time now, which is extremely fast. Watch out for the classes and subclasses system. That means that all classes, and so if you want to file a trademark, you need to say for which class. There's 45 classes. It's called the niche classification. And there's, for example, a class for medical devices. There's a class for medicine, etc. So you need to see for which class you want to do it. And then remember that in China, all these classes are divided into subclasses. So you need to exactly know for your products and services what you want to register and don't miss anything, because if you miss something, you won't be protected for it. And very important, register a Chinese language name. Viagra, which is owned by Pfizer, did not register a Chinese language name. They were like, we are Pfizer, we're calling this drug, Viagra, and the Chinese people will use that name. But the company, which is a huge American company, forgot one major thing, which is Chinese people speak Chinese. This sounds very simple, but most people forget about it in Western companies, which means the markets, the Chinese market, will not be able to just use the name Viagra because it doesn't sound really easy in Chinese language. So they will translate the name into something else. And that's what happens here. In the Chinese market, Viagra is known as Weike, which means big brother in Chinese language. And someone else, another company actually in the same industry, filed that trademark and then has the full rights on it. That means that Pfizer cannot sell their drug under that name, even though Chinese people only want to buy a drug with that name. So that's a huge problem. So therefore, my tip, make sure in the beginning you make also a Chinese language name for your company and product and register that name. To give you a few ideas how that can be done, you can translate the sound itself. So McDonald's in China, it's Chinese is Maidanlao, Ferrari, Falali. That is one way to do it. With my name, Van Mellenstein, I can guarantee you that's not going to work because then you end up with a way too long name. So that's not a good way to do it. Then translate the meaning. If you have, for example, an Apple product, an apple in Chinese is literally 苹果, then it's the same thing. So that's perfect. Same thing can be said about Microsoft, which is 微软 in Chinese. But if you ask me, the best names are the mixed names that sound kind of similar, but that have an amazing meaning. For example, Coca-Cola sounds very similar, but it actually means delicious happiness. I mean, like, try to get that in Europe and you get like probably a lot of people smashing you around the head with, you can't use that for a sugar drink, etc. Or another great name, Bauma, precious horse for BMW. So those are the great ways to make a Chinese name. And then there's actually a fourth way, and that's how I made my Chinese name, because I can't really translate the sounds from Mellenstein or the meaning or mix it, because that will be way too long of a Chinese name. So my Chinese name is Wang Reining, and that is a completely like new name. So that's also a way you can do it, make something completely new for your company or your product. So that's for trademarks, the really important things. Then in your industry, you probably also have to deal with a lot of patents. And for that, it's important to know that in the Chinese system, there's actually three types of patents. There's the invention patent, which is het Rijksoctrooi, the Dutch patent, which has exactly the same ways for patentability, which means it needs to be new, inventive, and industrially applicable. Then, under the Chinese system, there's also the utility model patent, which is more of like a lower class patent, still very effective. Invention patent has 20 years of protection, utility model patent 10. It's for less inventive patents, but it still gives you that monopoly. So it's very, very handy. And then, so the only difference between those two patents is the level of inventiveness needed for patentability, which is a lot lower for the utility model patents. And then there's design patents, which in European law we would call design rights. We actually have a whole European law specifically for that. But under the Chinese law, they put it under the patent law, and these designs need to be creative and new. And so you need to apply for it with CNIPA. You need a Chinese patent agent to draft the claims, because translation is very crucial. We've seen many patents from Dutch companies fail in the past 20 years because the translation was not correct. It was done by a translation agency, and the claims of the patents are the most important things. So you need to have people in that specific field that actually translate the patent in a way so it means exactly that. Otherwise, you end up with a patent that you can't enforce at the court, because the court says, well, what you say makes sense, but it doesn't say it like that in the patent. And then you say, well, it says so in the Dutch patent or in the UK patent or in the German patent, but that doesn't matter. For a Chinese judge, what matters is what's in the patent in China. And the biggest watch out for patents is that a patent, which is a monopoly right, so you'll be the only one to use that invention or design right, or utility model for a specific period of time is that the patent has to be new. So if it's published anywhere in the world or known anywhere in the world, because it's disclosed, then you can't patent it anymore in China. So on this absolute newness, these novelty requirements, I want to share a quick case with you, which sees on the bus on the left, which is a German bus from the MAN company, Neoplan, versus a Chinese bus from Zhongda company. These buses are extremely similar, as you can see. And the moment the Germans found out that this Chinese bus was on the market, they quickly checked if they had filed for a design patent, so for the looks of the bus, and they indeed filed it. So they took the Chinese company to court back in 2006, and in 2009 the Beijing court made a decision and said, like, indeed the German company has filed this patent, they got it registered, and there is a patent infringement because the buses look way too similar. So there needs to be a compensation to the German company. So Chinese company was very unhappy with this. And what did they do? They sent a team to Germany to check whether or not there were any publications of this bus before the application date of the Chinese patent. And they did find it. In Bus Magazine and Bus Aktuell, they found a publication of this bus by the marketing team of the German company, which invalidated the whole case. And that's the reason why now you still see these buses of the Chinese company on the market. So lesson learned is make sure you first apply for the patent, and after you get the receiving information of the patent office, then you can share it on social media or on a trade fair or whatever, but first apply for the patent. Then in your industry, you all would have like a website, you all would have like instruction manuals and pictures, and sometimes even software. All these things are protected also by copyright, because copyright is the expression of an idea in a certain form. So website, manual, software, packaging, images, product catalog, photographs, all protected by copyright. So it's not only Harry Potter and these kind of things what people usually think with copyright. No, all these things are protected by copyright. And copyright is very handy to have in China. And you actually have it from the moment you create a work. However, how to prove it, how to prove that you have copyright, that's a bigger problem in China. And the answer is to file for copyright protection. If you file for copyright protection, so registration in China with the Chinese Copyright Bureau, you obtain a copyright certificate. And that copyright certificate is great because it says you have the copyright, and it swifts, like it changed the burden of proof. So instead of you having to prove that you have the copyright, that does the certificate for you. The other party that says you don't have it has to prove that you don't have it, which will be very hard if you have it registered and you have this certificate. So this can be filed with the Copyright Protection Center of China, and that is something that I highly encourage people to do. Now, another thing we've noticed is that we've seen more and more e-commerce infringement reaching Europe, so postal packages with certain devices, etc., that are counterfeits, that either infringe like patent rights or trademark rights. So for that, it's very important to check the Chinese e-commerce websites to see whether or not your IP has been infringed, because also sellers often use images from the company website or the trademark or the photograph. So if you search on photographs, which you can also do, you can easily see if what's happening on these Chinese e-commerce websites, or you put in your trademark name, etc. What's important to know is that a lot of people always do notice and takedowns with these e-commerce platforms. And that is a great way to take it down, but the problem is they pop up later after. So what is really important is that because in China, you notarize evidence of any infringement is to first notarize evidence in case you think it might be a big infringer. So that usually means that I would go to the notary office, I show a notary public that on the website there's an infringement, and then he makes a document with printout saying like, yes, I notary on this day saw these infringements on these websites, and then you have proof that you can use. Then you can either do a sample purchase to get further evidence, or you can go into settlement negotiations, or you can immediately sue. But the most important thing is to first get this evidence. That's the most important thing. Then there's one area that is not intellectual property, but is very close to intellectual property. That's trade secrets, because a lot of trade secrets end up becoming intellectual property. And for example, if you make any invention, before you have patented it, it is a trade secret. But also methods, recipes, marketing strategies, customer lists, customer information, etc., is all trade secrets. Basically anything that gives you a competitive edge against your competitor, compared to your competitor, is a trade secret. Then it's very important to know how the Chinese law protect these trade secrets. It basically says you need to have 3 forms of protection: physical measures, technological measures, and contractual measures. And this is important if you're going to deal with a Chinese business partner, because most of the time they will tell you, it's all about quantity and relationships in China, so please share your information with us and we will protect it very well. But the thing is, if these 3 measures are not taken, you're basically giving your information, your trade secrets away for free, and you can't protect it after anymore. So it's very important for you to know how this works. So physical measures means if I go to your company, there's someone at the entrance that stops me. I can't just freely walk in. If I can freely walk in and see documents, those documents then are not protected. Technological measures is that computers, etc., have passwords, etc. That's very important. But when it comes to dealing with Chinese companies, the contractual measures are very important, which means you need to have non-disclosure agreements in place, signed by the other person, or in Chinese it means like stamped by the legal representative of the Chinese company with a company chop, in order for you to be able to show them your secret information. If you don't have that in place, literally you'll be giving it away for free. If you have a company in China, it's also important to tell your employees how important trade secrets are for you. And if you do these 3 things well, you can stop them from abusing your trade secrets. So that happened with Eli Lilly, another American pharmaceutical giant, that had the problem that one of their key researchers was downloading trade secrets from the computer system of the company. They immediately confronted that person. That person said like, I'm leaving, bye-bye. And they immediately hired a lawyer to make sure that that person got an injunctive relief, so got like a gag order in order to stop that person from sharing that information. And by doing so, the company successfully was able to patent that medicine. So that worked very well in practice. On the enforcement, because we often hear that Chinese enforcement doesn't work, Chinese enforcement actually does work very good. What is very important is step 1, get the evidence of the infringement and get it notarized by a Chinese notary public. This is crucial. If you have this, then you can do administrative enforcement, civil enforcement, criminal prosecution, customs protection, or negotiations. Sometimes it's also better and it takes a lot of time, it takes less time to just settle a case or make a potential business partner. But step 1 is the most crucial thing. Get the evidence before you start talking to your counterparty, or somehow they found out that you know about the infringement, because that would make it very hard to get the information you need. So now we're going to the Q&A. Thank you very much for your time. And I hope after this horrible COVID time that we can at one point all see each other in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinout. Very important to know how to properly protect your intellectual property in China. We have some questions. I would like to go back to Nico first and ask a question about, you gave an overview, Nico, about the Dutch government network and how we are active throughout China. That's first-tier cities, the bigger cities such as Beijing and Shanghai, but also second-tier cities, which you could call smaller, but are still very big for us, seen from a Dutch perspective. What would you say are the most profitable opportunities for Dutch companies? Is that in the bigger cities, or are there more opportunities in smaller cities such as Nanjing, Wuhan, or other provincial capitals?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. I think it's difficult to give a generic answer. It very much depends on what you are producing or what you would like to either export or set up a business in China according to the different procedures that I presented. I know that it is being said more frequently that maybe the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are already very busy and very much some say even dominated by other countries or big corporates from the US or Germany or other countries, UK, etc. It very much depends, I think, on what kind of product you are manufacturing yourself or service you want to provide. So there's no generic answer. It might be more difficult, maybe, to a certain degree, if you want to do business in the first-tier countries. But I wouldn't definitely advise to forget about those big cities and only focus on less big cities. We've been looking very much at other cities recently, for instance, in Suzhou. It's close to Shanghai. You've got various developments in China on science and tech park or innovation centers that are quite big, and that could provide for interesting opportunities. So I would more advise look at what you are offering, and especially look at what you are offering and how does that relate to what China is already producing itself. And then look at the opportunities where they are, and we can quickly connect you to any of our colleagues in any of the cities where we have a representation. And I think we're represented in 10 cities, and it's not only the cities, but of course they cover an entire region as well.
Okay, so just ask you and your team, and you can tell more about a specific case. Now,
yeah.
Question, if you look at Dutch companies in pharma or medical devices that are active in China, who do they cooperate with most frequently? What kind of organizations? Do they have agents, or do they work with hospitals or pharma associations? What do you see how Dutch companies work in China best now?
And I think that that also depends a little bit on what they are doing. Several are indeed working very much with hospitals and very much so with public hospitals. That's also where the biggest volume is, as I showed in my presentation. Others are more like intermediaries, helping, for instance, Chinese companies to get to increase their efficiency in their value chain. Others are really focusing really on the B2B or providing also to public authorities. That's what you have as well. So are different types, but in the pharmaceutical sector, of course, it's still different. But if you look very much at the medical devices, so in medtech, a lot are working with public hospitals or in the B2B as a supplier.
Okay, thanks. And again, I think people can contact your team if they have any specific questions. Yes. We also have a few questions for Reinout. So if I can switch back to you, Reinout. One of the questions is if you could elaborate on the need of copyright protection specifically for pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, very good question, Judith. Thank you for that. Most people and most companies, when I tell them that copyright is interesting for them, they often don't really see that, because copyright is kind of like a right that is being put in the minds of people as a right for like movies and books and these kind of things. That's how normal people would see the right of copyright. What I found is that copyright basically, especially, well, not different in Europe, but there's no need for registration because it can be easily more proven that you have. But what I found is that copyright in China is kind of like the cement that puts the bricks of patents and trademarks very well together. As in, it is one of those rights that gives you rights that are necessary sometimes to get rid of certain companies that copy you. Let me give an example. Let's say you have a patent on a product, a pharmaceutical product, and you have trademark registered for that product. But then you have a Chinese competitor that's using e-commerce website and other sales channels to sell something that pretends to be you, but it isn't. So they're not infringing upon your trademark, because they use a name which is very similar to yours, but far enough away for it not to be a trademark infringement. So let's say 2 letters different, or a Chinese sounding name that sounds very, very similar to your Chinese name, but far enough that it doesn't infringe. So people are thinking it's you. And then at the same time, and they're making a product that is for the same thing that you are using your pharmaceutical product, but it does not infringe upon your patent. So what they're doing basically on trademarks is okay, and on patents is also okay. But still people are thinking and are misled in thinking that it might be your company that is selling this. And then it goes even further, because this company might have copied your manual, or is using your photos, or is using text from your website. That's something we often see, that text of website, that photos of website is used, or that your packaging is copied, your product catalog is copied, or your labels are copied. If you register these various rights, so let's say your manual, photos of a product, packaging, product catalog, the labels, and the printout of your website, you have a lot more protection that you can randomly choose through copyright certificates to use against these kind of infringements. So like I said, it's kind of like the cement that pulls the bricks together, that keeps it in its place. So very handy rights to have also if you're in the pharmaceutical sector.
Okay, that's clear, I think. Another question.
Judith, can I maybe add one element to my question, or to my answer? Sorry, not to my question, but to my answer. Is what I've been seeing so far in the now the 6 months that I am here, is that it's very much also in the first tier cities that you see that there's a very dynamic ecosystem. Some of the elements that I presented in my presentation, and what I see there in the specific first tier cities is that the local authorities generally have also more means in providing all kinds of support, depending also, of course, on the type of activity that the Dutch companies would want to provide, and which roadmap they would choose to take in one of the 3 that I presented. But that I think is also an important element to take into consideration, and there are various business models where local authorities can provide for various supportive tools that can sometimes be added up by a national authority as well. So it depends a little bit, obviously, again, what the Dutch companies would like to focus on, but I would definitely not single out second or third tier and leave aside the first tier cities because of the dynamics in this ecosystem, especially if you get to a higher end in your products, especially products. or the service, then the local ecosystem can make a difference, especially also the tools that the local authorities could have in providing support to the Dutch companies.
Yeah, and that's something that you know for each region in China, what kind of support would suit a certain Dutch company best?
Yes.
Okay, that's a very good addition. Thank you. Another question in the chat for Reinout. Should a non-disclosure agreement be drafted in Chinese as well as the Dutch or English version?
Yeah, very good question again, Judith. There we really have to look into more what is the governing law. And so if you're a contract, let's say with Huawei, where Huawei obviously would also have some assets in the Netherlands, then you can have a non-disclosure agreement that is governed by maybe like Dutch law, and then you don't particularly need to have like a Chinese translation because the Dutch law and the Dutch court would then say like, well, it's clear for both professional parties what was meant here, and assets can be seized in the Netherlands, etc., or in other European countries. So then in such circumstance, it's okay to not have a Chinese translation and just have it in Dutch or in English. However, you will notice that most Chinese companies actually do not have any presence in Europe and are mostly in China. First of all, if you then would apply Dutch law, that is a great idea in the minds of many companies because it feels very safe. But try to enforce a judgment that you win at the court in The Hague against a Chinese company. That would be extremely hard and maybe impossible. So that would not be a route I would recommend ever. What would make more sense is to then have an agreement in Chinese law, on the Chinese law with, for example, the court in Shanghai. It must be like a proper court like the Shanghai court, which is also very specialized in IP. Could also be arbitration in Hong Kong, could also be arbitration in Singapore. These options are also there. And then if you would do it on the Chinese law, then you definitely do need to have it both in English and Chinese. And then you can say like English is the leading one, but that way you make sure that you don't open up yourself to the argument of a potential judge saying like, well, you know, the CEO of Huawei, he didn't really understand that English word or whatever. So let's say that there's not a problem, because what parties understood both ways was different. So by having that Chinese translation, you make sure that both parties know exactly what has been agreed upon. So that would be my preferred way when it is on the Chinese law both. On the Dutch law, doesn't matter. Just make sure that the Chinese company has assets there. Otherwise, you can't really get your compensation. But if it's in China, then yes, definitely bilingual.
Bilingual. Okay, thanks. Another general question. Are the costs of Chinese patents similar to the costs in Europe or the United States?
Well, they're cheaper than in Europe. USA is extremely expensive, I would say. So it's cheaper than both, which makes sense because most of the things in China generally are cheaper than in the West. So getting a patent here would be cheaper than getting a patent back home.
Okay. And then the last question asked in the chat, also regarding patents. Can translations be corrected in China in the same way as can be done for Dutch and European patents?
So during the granting process, good question indeed, Judith. During the granting process, when you basically put forward your patent and you say to CNIPA, which is the Chinese patent office, this is the patent, how I would like to get it registered, then you usually have the communication with the patent officer of the Chinese patent office with regard to if that if that text is admitted or not, or it needs to be changed, etc. So that's the discussion you will have there. Once a patent is granted, it's not possible to change it anymore. And that's the problem that most companies now, even in 2021 face, is that they ended up having patents protected in China and registered, but the translation, if you read it in Chinese, it does not say what it says in English or in Dutch. So these are the cases where then you have to explain to a judge, like, listen, even though it says this word, if you look at the PCT application, which is the Patent Cooperation Treaty application, it says something else, then you're in murky waters, because judge can go that way, but they also can decide not to go that way. What you want to have is a patent that is translated correctly from English or Dutch into Chinese. And the only way to get that is by having a Chinese patent lawyer doing that for you. That's the only way that you can make sure that it's the same. And then it also depends on the patent lawyer, to be honest. So that is really important thing to do. Otherwise, you end up having a patent that you have the certificate of, but you can't enforce.
Okay, that's also a very clear answer. Thank you. We're nearing the end time of this webinar, so I would like to encourage you to ask questions if you have more. Yes, another one's coming in. Well, that's not a question. It's coming into the chat. You can all have a look at the chat, because we would like to ask you to fill in a short questionnaire. It takes a very short time to fill out, but it will help us to improve these kind of webinars in the future. So if all attendees could click the link in the chat and help us to evaluate this webinar, then I would still like to encourage you to ask us questions if you have any, because we have Beijing online here now. If there are no more questions that you would like to ask Reinout, Nico, or myself, then I would like to thank both Reinout and Nico to making the time during their evening to enlighten us about the medical market for Dutch companies in China and how to properly protect your Dutch intellectual property also in China. I cannot stress enough how important it is to prepare well. So thank you both for providing this information. Applause. We will share the information discussed here today with you via email, so you can have a look at the slides and the information shared here, and the webinar will also be published on the YouTube channel of Briskr. I would also like to thank Briskr for hosting this session here today. There's also the opportunity now for some virtual networking. If you would still be interested in that, then Briskr will put us in digital meeting rooms where Nico and Reinout and myself will also be present. So if you would like to just network, chat to us, just have a discussion, not specific questions, but just talk, then you can stay online, hang in here, and then we will talk to you there. Thank you very much for your attendance today.